Thank you very much, everybody, and welcome to Definitive and Statement of Public Rights of Way Subcommittee Agenda for the 3rd of July. First item is apologies of absence of replacement members. I note that Ian Carrington has sent his apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have any further apologies.
Thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. That's fine. Nobody's got anything to declare on the items on the agenda. And we move on to the minutes of the 9th of December 2020. And the only person that's on the list is Councillor Ian Fleetwood. Would you like to recall?
Thank you, Chairman. I have been to other places since 2020, but I have read the minutes and there do seem to be a true record of that meeting.
So you're proposing them?
I could propose them for you.
Thank you. I'll second that. Everybody in favour of adopting the minutes? Yeah. That's it. Thanks, team. Moving on to item 4, and which of you two gentlemen is going to introduce?
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'm on. Red light's on anyway. So the first case we have before us is an application for a byway open to all traffic. So that's a form of public right-of-way which allows for the driving of motor carriages, as well as horse riding, carriage driving and pedestrians. So basically the full set of opportunities and rights. In the parish of Well in East Lindsey, between Well High Lane and the St Margaret's Church. The report, as you will have read, demonstrates that a number of members of the public have been stopped from using this route up to the church by the new owners of, I think it's the Manor, isn't it? Known as it? Is it known as the Manor, Andrew? Can't remember. Well Vale Hall, beg your pardon. Who have recently moved in, and this route isn't recorded on the definitive map. There is no records of any other highways rights being recorded up to the church, so the church looks to sit in isolation almost. Obviously that's caused an issue, and members of the public, and in fact Carol Jackson in September 2022 submitted 68 user evidence forms of people claiming to have used the route up to the church over a period between the early 1950s and 2022. So as you know, we won't go through all the case evidence bit by bit. However, we haven't prioritised this case. It was going to be dealt with in the date order of receipt. However, in the intervening time, it would appear that there's been a number of issues arising in the parish of Well, and for that reason, the applicant has made an appeal to this committee, principally on criterion 1 of the exception criteria for dealing with cases out of the date order of receipt. That being where there is sustained aggression, hostility and ill feeling within a community that is causing severe disruption to the life of that community, and that in processing the case early, there is a strong likelihood that this will reduce. So as you can imagine, routes up to the church can be quite emotive, given that there will be people wanting to visit that church for any number of reasons, particularly looking at after and tending the graves of past loved ones, but also for the opportunities potentially of funerals and of weddings, should there need to be that facility at the church. So, for example, you've seen some of the examples that Carol Jackson's put in her application. On page 13 of families not being able to go and have headstones affixed, or a family waiting to have their mother and wife's ashes interred. Those wishing to visit those who've been buried in the churchyard, and the various annual celebrations that would have been held at this church. Whilst access can be reached via an alternative route via footpath 79, it's not a particularly commodious route for those wishing to do so, particularly those of age or those that are hampered by disability, and indeed those wishing to push prams, push chairs and so on. I would imagine that those wishing to carry coffins would struggle immensely with that as the route. The owners of Wellvale Hall have erected gates. That's right, isn't it, Andrew? And locked gates, which have now ostensibly stopped the usage of that. In terms of the hostility and ill feeling, it's our understanding from the appellant's case that on a number of occasions there's been significant verbal exchanges. The police have been involved in the past in terms of speaking to the owners of Wellvale Hall. So we are aware that there is an element of hostility that has gradually accrued over time since the application. And it is whether or not that is sufficient enough to upgrade the priority of this case within the backlog of cases that we have. You will note that we have consulted the local member for the area, which is Councillor Davey, whose comments have been recorded on page 10 of the report, and states, "I am fully aware of the situation at Well that has caused so much anguish and distress to residents in the community. I fully support the appeal that is coming before members and urge them to support the wishes of the parish meeting and residents that are detailed in the submission to the council." So, Andrew, if you could just bring up the map, just so we can just check that off, and any photo. We've got photographs of this one, haven't we? Yeah. There we go. So you can see the route there leading from Well High Lane up the track right outside Wellvale Hall. So it does pass quite close to Wellvale Hall, so you can understand, their point of view from it not being recorded on the definitive map. They've taken an opportunity to make their property a more private one. And then leading up to Wellvale Hall itself and to St Margaret's Church. And if you could just move on, Andrew, up to the pictures. I suggest we've got a slow connection. So you took these pictures, didn't you, Andrew? Is that right?
Not this one. No.
Oh, right, okay. Not that one, no. No, but the
I haven't been there.
Oh, right, okay.
Pictures,
So we'll have.
they've come from the applicant and other sources.
Oh, right, okay. Thank you.
So that's the overview of the slide. So if I select the
Okay, so you can see the start of the route there with the cattle grid and the gate. Moving the mind route. And notices there stating private, so you can see how the occupiers are trying to demonstrate. Where's that one? Just right at the start.
That's right. That's on the
So we can't date that. That hasn't been dated within the thing, but we don't know the origins of that. But it does seem to indicate that some form of route subsisted over the land and to stick to it. Now, whether or not there's any information that Wellvale Hall have in their deeds or anything like that, we're not privy to that. And we would obviously try and look for that during the evidential collection process. But you can see how members of the public, having read that sign, would assume that they did have some form of opportunity of access. However, that's obviously the point in contention now that has now ceased. Andrew? It's just looking along the track, just keep moving it on, just so you get a feel of the type of route that it is. So it's a fairly well-made surfaced route through parkland, rural parkland, attached to a larger house, shall we say? I'm not sure.
In the bottom left-hand photo, you can see the gate just beyond the cattle grid. That's obstructing the route.
Yeah. So if you see, it's quite faint in the background. There you go. That's a better picture of it. The wrought iron gates. So again, given that not just a physical obstruction, but also something we have to look at is the psychological obstruction of gates of that sort, ornate, trying to indicate a level of privacy. which would deter public user.
Did you have a question, Councillor Fleetwood?
Yes, I've got a couple of questions there. Number one, the churchyard is not a closed churchyard. It is still in use, and it is the availability of graves are still there. So if there was access, it is possible that somebody might be buried there at some point in the future. Contrary to what people might think earlier on, I've said to I've been to a lot of places in Lincolnshire, and I have actually been to Well. But it's a few years back, there was a school down there, and I didn't go to that school. I wasn't, no, it was a little later than that, but there's a school somewhere in this location. It's where, sorry? It's in the hall. So the hall is what was the school, and that's now gone into private ownership, is that? Okay, so that explains. So I've actually been to this place. So I don't know quite. I know it was a fairly tortuous track to get down to it at the first time I went there, because I've been there 2 or 3 times for one reason or another. But I just question, if there was a funeral, it would be one heck of a journey to get down there to actually carry out any of the formalities attached to it. And it certainly wouldn't be accessible via a public footpath. So what happened previously to the changes in ownership?
One thing to perhaps note, Councillor, is that with it being a church, there is a potential overlap with rights to the church in the church's own right, which are not public, because they would be limited potentially to the parishioners of that parish. So it wouldn't make it a public right of way, which is what we would be looking at. It was more of more like an easement. So again, I am aware that the parish council are reviewing and looking into that element as well, but they felt there was sufficient enough public user to make a submission to us for a public right of way. Now, obviously, when we've not determined that, we've not looked at the evidence because it's of a low priority thus far, and we'll, if this is prioritised, those are the sort of things we would also be looking at.
First of all, I'll bring Colin Matthews in, and then I'll pick up Ms. Councillor Clark.
Who was that speaking? Is it someone behind me? Oh, it's you, Paul. I couldn't see his name. I've been involved in this dispute from not quite day one, but month one. And I went and visited the church and to put some flowers on the grave of one of my relatives who happens to be in the churchyard. And I pulled up to those gates, and the people were very aggressive and very unpleasant towards me. And in the end, I bluffed it out and said, I've got some flowers, I want to go and see my Auntie Nellie, and I've got some lovely pictures of me up there. There is a public footpath that accesses the church. It's not impassable, but it goes up a very steep bank, so there is a public footpath leading there. These people have just been very, very awkward across the whole case, to the point that they bulldozed badger sets and things like that. They are just stomping around with size 15 boots in a small community. But there is a tight community in Well, and there will be burials in that church. And I think some compromise has been reached at the moment that they'll allow people through if they're pre-noticed, but it's a really messy situation, largely caused by the new owners.
Thank you for the background. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. The definitions you said earlier about the sustained aggression and causing severe disruption to the life of the community, in the opinion of the officers, have they been reached?
We tend to take the view that if there's been, it's a difficult one, what's classed as sustained and how hostile is hostile. As I've mentioned in previous meetings, that there is often an underlying level of ill feeling because of the type of issues that we're discussing and looking into. It's whether or not that has been heightened beyond the sort of the normal levels. And in this instance, since the application has been submitted, it's my own personal opinion, and I repeat, it's my own personal opinion, is that has been met. Andrew, have you got any further on that?
Off you go, Colin.
I don't know if it's possible to look at the map again. They have one neighbour. Have you gone through this? It's definitely not there. And the neighbour lives in the walled garden. And the neighbour is a lady called Gay James, née Weston. Westons own about 20,000 acres and own the whole. It's almost feudal in their control over the local area. Because they're neighbours, there is a battle going on between Gay James. I mean, you wouldn't want to fall out with your neighbours, but if your neighbour happened to own all of the, so they all own the parkland. But interestingly, Willoughby Estates, which is Gay James' farm, closed down all the rights of way when they bought the land from Boots, and they've continued to do that. They place, I don't know what you're telling me the right word, Chris, but they place these letters in the field saying there are no rights of way here and you can't develop rights of way. And they set this up to close down the rights of way. So I think it's a question, to a certain extent, a bite a bit. I think there is a public right of way, but historically they were trying to stop the rights of way through the park, but allowing the rights of way to the church. And now it's come back, to bite them to a certain extent.
Yeah, the process you mentioned there is a process under the Highways Act, section 31(6). The Highways Act for statutory declarations by landowners. It's well utilised by landowners across the country. There's nothing out of the ordinary about it as it goes. They're not actually stopping up existing right-of-ways. What they're doing is notifying the public that they have no intention of dedicating any further rights-of-way. So no matter how many times you've used it over a 20-year period, from that point where the notice is erected, you will not be able to accrue rights over that 20-year period. The difference with this case is that we're looking at rights that predate any statutory declaration potentially. So for example, the way it works is if you put in a statutory declaration today in 2023, any further usage of a route over your land where you've made that declaration for can't be included in your accrual of 20 rights. You can still calculate it retrospectively though. So if you have evidence of 20-year usage up to 2023, you can still claim that right subsists even though a declaration was put in 2023 to stop any further accrual. So that's the process that Willoughby Farms will have been through. As I say, it's fairly common. It's actually advised now by the National Farmers Union, as you can imagine out of the back of all these applications we're getting, that they are advising land managers to actually go down this route. So yes, there is a history of rights of way issues in the parish, as Councillor Matthews was alluding to. And the question here, based on the appeal, is whether or not the applicant for the appeal has satisfied you as members as to whether or not you feel that aggression and hostility is sufficient for us to move the case beyond the date order of receipt.
Thank you for that. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Can the sign that was on the fence that says the LCC sign, is that a type of sign that we've got examples of elsewhere? Is that a sign that we can say was LCC at some point?
It's not one I've come across in 27 years, but the typeface and the language and the type of style, that embossed style on a metal plate, is something we have used in other locations with different wording for different purposes. So it's not entirely impossible that is not something, that wasn't a county council sign. It is entirely possible that we did erect that at some point. Under what auspices and for what reason, I honestly don't know. But it does look like something that we may have done.
So still a grey area then, unfortunately. I was hoping you was going to say there's several examples around the county, but unfortunately not.
Yeah, not of that wording, but of that style of sign.
Yeah.
Very much so. We use it where we're trying to discourage motor vehicles in the, on bridleways, for example. It'll say Road Traffic Act section 34, but it's the same type of typeface and the same style of sign.
Yeah, I was hoping that was going to give us a bit more, but for me, if the police have been involved, there's lots of people trying to use this. Looking at the overheads, the other route to the church, that doesn't look like a route. When the grass is more than road, then that's not a road. To me, this meets criteria 1 from what I can see, and I'd very much be supporting that this should be bumped up, Chairman.
Are you moving that?
I'd be happy to, yes.
Thank you.
It's been seconded by Councillor Matthews, but I'm just going to raise the question, ask the question of the sign. Obviously, Mr. Miller said that he is not aware of the sign, and the sign doesn't look to be 27 years old, and it looks to be remarkably well maintained. So I would possibly think that it's possibly not our sign, because if it looks in that good a condition, I think it would have green mould on it or something similar, as per most signs do in the countryside. So I think that potentially somebody's taken ownership of it and potentially somebody maintains it.
It would certainly be an element for us to investigate as part of the evidential process, because ultimately, if that were a county council sign, there must have been some reason and rationale for erecting it and discussion with the owners of the time. Now, Councillor Matthews may be able to assist here, but was that a county council school or was it a private school? So it wasn't a county council school.
No, it's a private school.
Right.
Interesting history on this site. The gamekeeper was murdered the day after his wedding in 1894 by a man from Aby. So there's quite an interesting, this was a very big poaching site maintained in traditional ways. So I would think that probably they'd be looking for everything they could do to clarify that situation. But it was a private school with the property rented from, I think, from Willoughby Farms, and then sold away, and then sold away again.
Thank you for that. There's some interesting historic facts coming out. The only bit I would add on the signage, there's if it's grey iron, there's a very limited amount of grey iron foundries in Lincolnshire, and it would have been done. It will only be one of a couple. So whether that's still traceable or not is something else. So it's been moved, it's been seconded, all in favour. That's unanimous. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 5, Woodall Spas. We've already...
Thank you, Chairman. Before we move on, sorry if I may.
Oh, sorry.
Beg your indulgence. We just need to set the position within the priority system where it will now be prioritised to, in terms of its case numbering, bearing in mind that that may still go up or down should other cases come in subsequently that are prioritised ahead of it in future years, because ultimately it won't be worked on immediately. It will go up to the next in the list of those that have already been prioritised, which are behind those which are already being worked on. So at the moment that would mean it would become case number 26 in our backlog. That's acceptable to the committee.
Is it acceptable? Yeah, we've got some nods. Yeah, we're happy at 26. Andrew.
So the second appeal today has been submitted by Amarissa Midgley, and she's the applicant for the modification order, which was submitted in 2023. The route runs between Manor Road and the Broadway in Woodall Spa. 21 user evidence forms were submitted in the application detailing usage over the route for the period between early 1950s and 2022. On acceptance of the application, officers considered that it met none of the exception criteria to warrant it being given high priority. It should be noted that because of its lowly position in the priority schedule, no assessment of the evidence has yet been undertaken, and no determination has yet been made on whether an order should be made for the route. So the appeal has been made on 3 exception criteria. Criteria 1, where there is sustained aggression, hostility and ill feeling within a community that is causing severe disruption to the life of that community, and that in processing the case early, there is a strong likelihood that this will reduce. Criterion 2, where there is significant threat to the route likely to cause permanent obstruction, e.g. a building, but not, for example, a lock gate or a residential fencing. And criterion 8, where there will be significantly assist in achieving a countryside and rights-of-way improvement plan, objective or statement of action. So I'll just briefly summarise through the appeal and debate under those 3 criterion. So criterion 1, where there's sustained hostility, aggression and ill feeling within the community, that is causing severe disruption to the life of that community. In summary, the appellant has suggested that the alleged footpath was a well-used shortcut by the local community and visiting walkers for accessing amenities in the village and the local area. She submits that the closure of the route has stoked local indignation and caused a simmering resentment and considerable and sustained ill feeling within the community, and that the disabled, pram and wheelchair users have been the most affected as the route has a hard surface, unlike other rights-of-way in the local area. One point I would make is that whilst the applicant has tried to demonstrate ill feeling, they've not actually, I don't feel, have actually demonstrated or provided an appraisal against how it meets sustained aggression and hostility elements of the criterion point, but that's for you members to decide. The applicant has suggested that the golf club has challenged people seeking use of the route, but that's their right given that the route is not currently recorded as a right-of-way, and it's not unheard of where landowners simply close the route and start challenging subsequent use of the route by members of the public after the closure. Criterion point 2, where the significant threat to the route is likely to cause a permanent obstruction. The appellant contends that the installation of electronic barrier, which can only be accessed by a key code, to be a permanent feature as it blocks pedestrian access. The user-based claims typically arise where a route has been used for a period of time but has been blocked. So really this case is no exception to the rule. One point I will question is whether the barrier would amount to a permanent obstruction, simply because the barrier could be removed and the feet. Criterion 8, so I'll just quickly and briefly move through the various statements of actions that the appellant is seeking an appeal on. So the first statement of action in the ROIP, that's the Rights of Way and Improvement Plan, is to identify and improve off-road routes linking communities with schools, employment centres and local services. So the appellant states that the enclosure of the footpath, alleged footpath, has disrupted the natural pedestrian flow from one part of the community to another. It's worth pointing out that whilst the alleged footpath may provide an additional off-road link to local amenities and services in the area, it would still be subject to a certain element of private vehicular usage, given that part of the route serves as the access or exit from the golf club's car park. Statement of Action 7, improvement of infrastructure on paths for health walk initiatives. The appellant suggests that the alleged footpath has been used by health walking groups in the past. However, there is currently no requirement to install infrastructure on such a route, given that it's not currently recorded as a public right-of-way. And also, the appellant has not provided details as to the health initiatives which currently incorporate the route or have incorporated the route in the past. Statement of Action 12, develop a key range of key routes in conjunction with disability groups. The appellant contends that the alleged footpath has a hard surface compared to other alternative routes in the immediate area, such as Woodall Spa Public Footpath 158, which is to the east of the claim route. And I'll show you that a bit later on the map. And this would make it ideal for people with disabilities and mobility issues to access amenities in the parish. She also suggests that it would provide the disabled with a circular route, as the alleged footpath could be coupled with other hard surface routes in the area. Statement of Action 14, promote benefits of using rights of way to a wider range of potential users. No explanation has been provided by the appellant as to how the alleged footpath would meet this statement of action. Statement of Action 18, identify and develop circular and linear recreational routes to and from the countryside or key tourism sites. The appellant submits that the alleged footpath would provide a link between an additional link between amenities in the local area. Statement of Action 19, improve, maintain and manage routes close to popular areas of the county and key tourist attractions. No explanation has been provided by the appellant why they believe the alleged footpath would meet this statement of action. The County Council has no maintenance responsibility for the route, given that it's not currently recorded as a public right-of-way. Also, it's worth pointing out that it would only be maintained at public expense should the public right-of-way be proven to have come into existence prior to the commencement of the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act 1949. As routes arising for long usage after this period are not maintainable by the public at large or by the public expense. Statement of Action 40, review of the current definitive map modification order priority system to give higher priority to key cases that will improve connectivity to the existing rights of way network for users. I'm not entirely sure how this is relevant to the appeal, as the appeal can only be considered against the priority policy in place, and that's the one with the exception criteria. The priority system will potentially be looked at in the next year or two as part of the review of a system that we've had for nearly 20 years now. So, and finally, Statement of Action 43. Identifying existing routes that meet the needs of restricted mobility users and publicise. The appellant has suggested elsewhere in the appeal that the alleged footpath was subject to and suitable for use by people with disabilities, as it has a hard surface. However, I probably should point out that the term existing routes in this statement of action could imply routes that are currently recorded as public rights-of-way or highways, as opposed to routes where the public rights-of-way are currently just alleged. I think we just have to remember that just because the application's been made, the natural course doesn't necessarily mean that it will be recorded as a public right of way. It has to go through the evidential process, and it'll have to meet the key tests, evidential tests, to warrant the making of a modification order and its confirmation to record the route as a right of way. That's just one potential outcome. Okay, I'll take you through the slides. There's not too many this time, thank you. So, as you can see, it's fairly close to the town centre. There are some amenities. The appellant has pointed out amenities further down. Kirkby Lane, which is the lane that runs to the southeast. So you've got Ostler's Plantation. I think there's several caravan sites down there and some nature reserves. And obviously in the northeast corner you've got the Petwood Hotel, a Kinema in the Woods and the facilities there, as well as the near the town centre, shops and various other attractions. The route itself, it runs north up from the Broadway, up the access track, exit into the car park, and right in front of the clubhouse to the golf club, before reaching public footpath. I think it's 154, which is also subject to the Viking Way, one of the County Council's long-distance promoted routes. So that's an overview of the aerial photography of the area, just to... Sorry, there's a bit of a delay there. There we go. and just a close-up, so you can see the car park that the footpath runs up the eastern edge of, and the fact that it actually runs in front of the clubhouse. So that's taken from the Broadway, looking up the route. Just beyond the no entry signs is an electronic barrier that's currently obstructing the route. I think there's a bit of a better photo coming up. Oh, no, there isn't. There's a polite notice that's been erected by the golf club. Again, that's not uncommon where a right of way has been closed. So it's that's the close up of the barrier. So I think that's been obstructed at some point over the past year or two. And that's just looking from the northern end of the route down the alleged footpath. So you've got the clubhouse in the distance, and that was taken from a point on the Viking Way along Manor Drive. I think that's it actually for the photographs.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fleetwood first, and then Councillor Clark.
Well, I'm going to take you on another historical tour again. I'll just pause it there for a moment while you collect yourselves. A few years ago, I used to caddy for golfers, and just by sheer chance it was at Woodall Spa, and just by sheer chance it was along this little track here, and as you can see illustrated against the clubhouse on the right hand side of the track is where the golf professionals shop used to be, and the caddies used to go out from there down the golf course, and I was one of those caddies. So I know the area very well, and I've spent quite a few hours in between or during or whatever, and I've seen people walk backwards and forwards along that route and go across what was the railway line, because it was, believe it or not, it was closed. Dr. Peachin had been along and closed the railway line and linked up to what is the Viking Way now. You turn left and go down towards the Dower House. So yes, I know the Dower House as well. So yeah, I know the track very, very well. The barrier is there. Yes, you've said the barrier could be removed. I don't know how many years ago it is since the barrier was put into place, but I do remember this being used as a route. So I am supportive, and I will propose the recommendation because I have memory, and I'm not going to tell you how many years ago it was. It certainly wasn't last week. And yes, I've sold my golf clubs now, so I haven't got an interest to declare. I've never played the course myself, but I have been round it a few times.
Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. Obvious one, really. When this put a sign out saying no public rights away, have the people who put the sign contacted the council to see if it is a public right away, or is it only their opinion?
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. It isn't recognised as a public right-of-way. It seems to me like somebody wants it to be a public right-of-way. They want to be able to use it, and because they've been stopped, they're unhappy about this. Looking at the map, they seem to be going past the golf course to go off to the left to the amenities, whereas the road Broadway takes you in that direction anyway. It doesn't look like it's much further out of the way. I'm not really sure what they're gaining from it. I can't see anything myself, Chairman, to say that I would support bumping it up personally. It doesn't seem to be achieving a great deal for the general public.
I would tend to agree with you there. I've been visiting this area since I was 5 or 6, and my father was a scout leader, so I'm very, very familiar with the area, and it does look very much like it'd be nice to have this rather than it being a definitive right of way. Any further questions? So you've moved that it should be.
Certainly, I've moved the recommendation that it should be moved up. To help the previous speaker, the route as you go past the clubhouse to the northeast and connect to the track on the other side where the old manor house is, as you cut left onto the public footpath 154, that does take you on a fairly secluded green route that takes you back down towards the Dower House and to the tea house in the woods, the Kinema, and other such locations. It is a completely different outlook to walking along the side of the B Road, which is the Broadway, the main artery going through the village.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate that the walk is going to be a lot nicer and a lot prettier, and that's lovely. But that doesn't give them, in my opinion, doesn't give them the right to walk through a business that's trying to look after its own assets. That was my feeling.
That's no problem.
In line with the recommendation, it's just saying it's given priority. It doesn't say what the determination would be.
It's just the position on the list.
Just position on the list, indeed. So, do we have a seconder from Councillor Fleetwood? Thank you, Councillor Clark. In that case, we'll go to a vote. All in favour, in line with the recommendation. Thank you. Against? Thank you, Councillor Gibson. So now all we've got to do is determine its position on the list, no doubt. We've got 27, so this could be 127.
Possibly.
Does the committee agree that goes after the Wells one? Thank you. There we go, and I believe that concludes the business for today.
Oh, thank you.
We're learning as we go. Thank you.
Learning.